A little over a year ago, just before the high holidays in 2021, I got a call from a former congregant that his dad was dying and he was asking to see a rabbi. Since neither of them belonged to a synagogue at the time, and I was the last rabbi he had been connected to, he asked if I would be willing to sit with his dad in the final days of his life. He clearly had some things that he needed to say, and he only wanted to say them to a rabbi. So on a warm August day, I made my way to his son's house to see what kind of comfort I could offer him. He was sitting outside by the pool, wrapped in a blanket, his family hovering close by. I had never met this man, but I could tell several things right away. He was adored by the people surrounding him. He had taken his first steps into the mystical place between life and death, and he was ready to unburden his heart. He was having trouble hearing, so I was offered a little microphone and a speaker to use as we talked. It was a little clumsy, but so was dying, and we both soon forgot the small black piece of plastic in my hand. Once everyone had left, he began to tell me his life story, his marriages, his children, his mistakes, the people he had hurt many times along the way. There was so much pain in his eyes. He had never been religious, had not been particularly dedicated to the Jewish community, and yet the comfort he craved in that moment was entirely Jewish. In his last months of life, his neshama, his Jewish soul, called from the deep and said to him, "I have been here all along. I have never left you." He described how he had apologized to everyone he had ever hurt, had gone through the process of truth-telling and seeking forgiveness, but he still felt afraid to die because he didn't know if God would forgive him. Was his honesty and commitment to repair enough? Would he be greeted by love after he took his final breath, or would he find himself in a place of eternal darkness because of the people he had hurt? Could he be granted this holy validation? I've sat with many people as they are dying, offered the final vidui for them if they are no longer able to speak, held hands with family encircling their bed and chanted the Shema for them while all they had left was breath. But I have never, in my 18 years in the pulpit, been asked so directly to receive someone's confession. The final vidui we offer is beautiful and usually scripted, and most often recited by clergy when someone can no longer speak their own words of confession. So this man's plea came as a surprise to me, but my response did not. I told him that ours is a God of forgiveness, Adon Haslichot, a God of forgiveness and mercy, and he had done exactly what he was supposed to do. He had seen the wrong he had committed, told the truth about it to the people he had hurt, committed to changing his behavior, and asked for their forgiveness. What he needed now was to forgive himself and to know without a doubt that he would be forgiven by God. That's how this gorgeous system works. Some people want to skip the hard part, to go directly to God and jump over the people. But that's not the Jewish way. And he had done that work. His soul could be at ease. His family brought him twice on Yom Kippur Day to see the Torahs in the open ark, him wrapped in a blanket in his wheelchair, this man for whom synagogue had held no real important place in his life. He had initially signed up for one slot in our Ne'ilah walkthrough, but he felt called to go back again later that day, knowing that this was his last chance to glimpse our sacred scrolls. Feeling the urgency of his last days, he wanted to be as close to the sacred as he could. He died just a few weeks later. I've thought many times since last year about this beautiful man and his life story, both because it moved me deeply and because within his story is a lesson we all need to learn. I believe that he asked to speak to a rabbi before he died because he had been carrying shame like a heavy burden on his back for the many decades of his life, and he could not release the weight without help. It was not guilt that compelled him to confess, because guilt, by nature, can be a productive emotion. Had he felt guilty for his actions, he would have been comforted by having been forgiven by the people he had harmed. But he couldn't find that comfort because he had internalized his actions and blended them into his sense of who he was, not just what he had done. And he could not free himself from that identity. Guilt, according to author Brené Brown, is adaptive and helpful. It's holding something we've done or failed to do up against our values and feeling psychological discomfort. Shame, by contrast, she defines as the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. Something we've experienced, done, or failed to do makes us unworthy of connection. In fact, shame is much more likely to be a source of destructive, hurtful behavior than the solution or the cure. Guilt, as we all know in this room, is also a decidedly Jewish emotion. We can joke about it, about guilt-tripping Jewish mothers, but the truth is that it is actually a gift that guilt and Judaism are connected, rather than Judaism and shame. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks explains it best in his essay, The Birth of Forgiveness. Judaism is primarily an ethic of guilt, as opposed to most other systems with our ethics, which are ethics of shame. One of the fundamental differences between them is that shame attaches to the person, while guilt attaches to the act. In shame cultures, when a person does wrong, he or she is, as it were, stained, marked, defiled. In guilt cultures, what is wrong is not the doer, but the deed. Not the sinner, but the sin. The person retains his or her fundamental worth. The soul you have given me is pure, we say in our prayers. It is the act that has somehow to be put right. That is why in guilt cultures, there are processes of repentance, atonement, and forgiveness. Imagine for a moment if everyone in the world could understand that our actions do not define the essence of who we are, that our souls are not tarnished by even terrible mistakes, that we are, in fact, pure and perfect. There are certainly historical figures who do not fit in this narrative, whose souls were blackened by their actions and for whom it would be impossible to imagine true repentance, true teshuvah, or forgiveness being granted. But I'm not talking about evil. I'm talking about you and me and the awful things that good people sometimes do to one another. I'm talking about the process of teshuvah and my belief that it actually works, that if you are sincere in your desire to change, to speak the truth, to make amends, extraordinary transformation is possible. One of my final classes in rabbinical school was Talmud as a tool for spiritual counseling, taught by a rabbi who ran Beit Shuvah in Los Angeles, a Jewish halfway house. Every week we would study a Talmudic text that he had himself studied with former inmates who came to Beit Shuvah in their transition back to society after leaving prison. Sometimes the textual connections to rehabilitation seemed rather obscure, and other times, like in Masechet Kiddushin, the Talmud is abundantly clear. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai says, even if one was absolutely righteous all his days, but he rebelled against God the last moment of his life, he has lost his earlier good deeds and is judged a wicked person. For it says, the uprightness of the righteous man will not save him on the day of his iniquity. And even if one was an absolutely wicked man all his days, but he repented at the last moment of his life, God does not remind him of his wickedness any longer. For it says, and the wickedness of the wicked man, he shall not stumble over it on the day he repents from his wickedness. The Talmud is telling us that teshuvah, return, is forever attainable by every single person, no matter how terrible your actions may have been throughout your life, if you are willing to do the hard, painful, vulnerable work to get there. In the words of Rabbi Jessica Kate Meyer, even if you have broken your vow 1,000 times, you carry within you the capacity to grow, to reprogram neural pathways. These holidays provide the scaffolding for that metamorphosis and the conviction that it is possible. If the desire for tshuva is present, then it is ours for the taking, because we are at our core creatures of transformation. This idea that we are not defined by our worst moments and that true forgiveness is available to us is such a beautiful concept in theory, but in practice, it is much more complicated. My teacher pushed us to consider just how far we would go as leaders of Jewish communities to live this essential teaching. If someone has just been released from prison, he asked us, and you happen to find out that they were in prison for murder, would you allow them to join your community? Would you sit with them and hear the yearnings of their heart? He was speaking from his daily experience of meeting with people who wanted to join Beit Shuvah upon release. His answer? If their desire to make Shuvah is sincere, and they have committed to working through Maimonides' 5 steps of repentance, naming and owning harm, starting to make change, making restitution and accepting consequences, making apology, and making different choices, then we are equals in the eyes of God. And the answer is yes, you are welcome here. But what if my mind screams, what if they've done something really awful? Something that to me seems unforgivable? His answer again, that kind of judgment should be left to God, not us. After all, God chose Moses, a man who was in his own rage murdered someone, to be the leader of the Israelites. Moses was not defined by that one moment of terrible judgment, and it did not stop him from fulfilling his destiny. Or what about Rachav in the book of Joshua, the woman responsible for hiding the spies when they go into the land of Canaan so that they can be successful when they attack the land? In response to her hospitality, she and her family are the only people who are spared when the Israelites bring down the city of Jericho. And who is this woman? The woman who made the Israelites' success possible? A prostitute. That's right, a prostitute. In her book, Accidental Saints, Nadia Bolz-Weber, the pastor who I love, wonders about this little passage of the Hebrew Bible in which a woman from a disgraced profession is credited with the success of the Israelite army. I thought, she said, of how God had sent a prostitute to help the Hebrew spies who would, through her help, and only through her help, conquer the city and fell the walls. I also wondered, had that been humiliating to them? Receiving help from a whore? Would they rather have done it all themselves or with help from someone of their own choosing? Lucky for them, and lucky for us, they weren't the ones choosing the people along the way. God was. God who, by the way, isn't exactly known for keeping calm and staying rational in extreme situations. Perhaps it's because of God's own experience of losing his proverbial divine cool that forgiveness is so deftly woven into our liturgy. Take, for example, the episode of the golden calf. God had already promised, long ago after the flood, never to destroy all of humanity again, and yet here God is, ready to annihilate the Israelites for making an idol, ready to heap judgment on them so harshly for this one terrible moment that Moses has to talk God down from this particular episode of rage. Moses is successful, and the result is one of the most famous passages of Torah that we repeat over and over again on Yom Kippur. Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum V'Chanun. Adonai, Adonai, a God compassionate and slow to anger, abounding in kindness and faithfulness, extending kindness to the 1,000th generation, forgiving iniquity, transgression, and sin. Have you ever wondered where this passage comes from? Why this passage of all passages is lifted from the Torah and woven into our liturgy on our most sacred day? It's because of the power it holds in moving God's own heart at one of our most devastating moments of Torah. After agreeing to save us, agreeing to see us as more than that one moment of fear, and lack of faith that led us to build an idol, God says to Moses, "This is what I need you to say to me when I'm furious. This is the mantra that I need to hear from now on when you make mistakes over and over again. I need you, humans, to remind me of who I am, a God who is compassionate and full of grace. And by extension, I will offer that back to you when you come calling." It is as if in that moment God is saying, if you promise to see me as more than just this moment when I'm filled with anger and want to destroy you, I will offer that kindness back to you. You are more than your mistakes, more than your bad choices, and so am I. When I'm sitting with someone as they end their life, I am overwhelmed by the majesty and beauty of humanity. It is as if the closer someone gets to leaving their body, the more beautiful they become, and the more true it feels that nothing can take away the perfection of that person's soul. These bodies that we hate and love and strive to change throughout our lives, they no longer matter. The stresses of our everyday existence, petty arguments, power struggles, sibling rivalries, small wrongs that grow into walls of silence over years, none of it matters. What matters in the end is truth and integrity and love. That's it. Our worst actions in life don't even matter if we've made teshuvah before we die, because we are more than the sum total of our mistakes. Our souls are not defined by those actions. This does not mean that suffering is not real. It is. Pain and suffering, as I talked about on Rosh Hashanah, are essential pieces of our growth and capacity for joy. We cannot have one without the other. But the end of life distills our perspective to a laser-like focus and allows us to understand that most of the perceived wrongs done to us in life were really not worth the stress and agony they caused. People who have endured true tragedy understand this. It should not take such suffering to get to this wisdom, but it often does. And we should, in turn, be able to offer that same compassion to ourselves, to understand that the wrongs we have committed do not define our identities for eternity. The man who offered me his confession last year needed to be granted the promise of absolution because he had somehow internalized over the course of his life that he wasn't worthy of God's love, that his actions, his mistakes would keep him from dying in peace. Although I could not paint a picture for him of what Olam Haba, the world to come, looks like, I could reassure him that he belonged there, exactly as he was. I was not with him when he died, but I held him close in my heart and knew that had I been by his side, it is these words I would have offered him, the beautiful words of confession written by Rabbi Rachel Barenblatt, that I offer to every person with whom I have the privilege of sitting as they take their final breaths. Dear one, source of all being, my God and God of my ancestors, life and death are in your hands. Hear my prayer. I reach out to you as I approach the contractions which will birth my soul into whatever comes next. As my soul chose to enter this life in order to learn and to love, I prepare now to leave through an unfamiliar door. I've made mistakes. Lift them from my shoulders and bless me with forgiveness. I open my heart to you. Help me to let go. Help me to release regrets so they don't encumber me where I'm going. All who have harmed me in body, mind, or spirit, in this incarnation or any other, I forgive them. May all whom I have harmed in body, mind, or spirit in this incarnation or any other forgive me in turn. Into your hand I place my soul. You are with me. I have no fear. As a wave returns to the ocean, I return to the source from which I came. May we all use these hours of Yom Kippur to remember that our souls are inherently pure. May we not wait until we are taking our last breaths to understand this fundamental truth. May we invite ourselves into the vulnerability required to speak the truth and transform that truth into action. May we all, please God, be inscribed in the book of life.